start this off.
It's the coldest day in there.
It's the coldest. Welcome to the coldest day here at Nevada County Airport. We got a very special guest today. Scott Perdue of the FlyWire YouTube channel is in the area and dropped by the hangar, and we want to clear up some issues on the B-17 crash 909. Scott Perdue, if you haven't checked out his channel, he's a bona fide aviator. Scott, you've got civilian experience. You currently own a Stearman and an aerobatic Bonanza.
Yep.
What's the designator on that?
It's an F-33C.
He's military pilot, retired military. He's a Rhino driver, F4, right out of pilot training?
Right out of pilot training.
Wow, to F-15s, Seymour Johnson, Lake and Heath. Retired airline pilot as well, right, after the airlines. And a Warbird pilot. What was your Warbird experience again, briefly?
Well, let's see, I flew, I had a couple of T6s in the Stearman, and I've flown, I have the P-51, the P-38, the B-25, and the DC-3, C-47.
And what outfits were those? Those were privately owned aircraft, but also with the Commemorative Air Force?
Yeah, I flew B-25s with the CAA.
And so you worked under the exemption, the FAA historical exemption. You're very
I've actually written a couple of those.
Wow.
For a private organization.
Okay, so directly to 909, you are in a disagreement with the NTSB report. You believe that MAC did in fact shut down the wrong engine.
That's correct, yes.
And so in 500 words or less, can you explain how or why?
Well, I think he had a problem with that mag. They weren't
in the number 4
number
engine.
and 3. Because remember, they couldn't get that one started either.
That's right.
And they used the nitrogen to blow it out, and that is not a. And I just want to say that's not an approved maintenance technique. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's not an approved maintenance technique. You don't go out and blow out the mags. So what I'm thinking is the mags are telling him that it has a problem. And frankly, after the analysis later on, they did have a problem. They should have been replaced.
With number 3 engine, the mags on number 3.
They were bad.
The NTSB Factual Report did not go into great detail regarding the magnetos on number 3 engine, but did go into great detail regarding the magnetos on the number 4 engine. However, these spark plugs do tell a story. And of course, the NTSB points out the P leads being removed from number 4 engine.
Yes. And that was not a good thing either. That's not standard either, and that's not standard wrong. But what happened was he had a problem, and he was biased to believe that it was number 4. Expectation
bias because of the previous issues with the mags on number 4. So what did Mac do? He just...
Well, I want to say what actually happened here is a thing that's called normalization of deviance. So we have, there's a non-standard practice, and I know what the problem is, and here's the workaround, and pretty soon that's normal. But it's not until it bites you. So in this case, what he did is he didn't trust his co-pilot. He didn't use crew resource management. There was no identification verification, like we do. I mean, like we do at American. You point at it and you touch it, and I agree, that's the one, and then you shut it down. He didn't do that.
Right.
He did say that, hey, we got a problem on 4. I'm going to shut it down. He reaches up and he punches the button, and.
That'd be the feather button.
The feather button. And that's actually not the correct procedure.
Right.
And what the NTSB showed us is the -1. I was telling you earlier that the
dash 1 is the aircraft manual, a military aircraft owner's manual, if you will, pilot operating handbook. The -1, that's the Bible. But go ahead on these military, on these these World War II aircraft, the -1 is not necessarily the Bible.
Well, yeah, it was actually just written very skosh. I mean, it was very minimal how to operate the airplane. The way they did it was when you go through training, you use this thing called the pilot training manual. And that outlines everything. I mean, in very much detail, from the pilot to the co-pilot to the gunner to the nav, everybody, even the tail gunner and all that. They have their job description, they have how the oxygen works, they have the procedures for how to do a run-up in detail, And then it also talks about, you know, if you have an engine failure on takeoff.
So in referencing the -1 instead of the pilot training manual, the NTSB may have been referencing basically the wrong manual?
I think incomplete. They did, and it's quite possible that Collings was doing that as well as part of their training aspect. Is they're not really training with what they used in World War II. So I collect these kind of manuals, so I was kind of into it. And I think it's not necessarily, I'm not going to say it's wrong, but it's not complete. It doesn't give you a complete picture how to operate the airplane.
So explain to us how you do a mag check versus a power check versus a prop check on these supercharged radial engines. And we don't know if 909 superchargers were still in service or not.
No, we do, because it's an 1820 and it has a supercharger. Okay, the 1820 has a supercharger. All the big radials do, from the 1340, actually 985, all the way up. They have superchargers, and that's internal, that's on the back of the case.
Versus a turbocharger, which is the disc you see on the bottom of the cowling of the B-17.
Yes, they do the same thing, but the supercharger is mechanical, and the turbo it uses exhaust gas pressure to spin the turbine that compresses the air that goes in for the compression charge.
Is that the component that we don't know if was in service on 909?
That's right.
It's always got a supercharger, but we don't know about the turbocharger.
Right.
But regardless, the power check should be done the same?
Well, no, actually the power check for the B-17 with the turbos is actually pretty complicated. And so in one way I can see why he wasn't really interested in doing it, but it was wrong for him not to do it, because I think it's pretty much standard in the big radial world. First flight of the day, you do a complete check, complete mag prop checks, and then power checks, and then you go fly the airplane. And later on, you do a prop check, because you want to make sure that the prop governor is working correctly, and it has oil in the dome. To actually govern the engine RPM, but also if you need to feather it. Because if you don't have oil up there, you ain't feathering.
So you do the full run-up, power check, mag check, prop check at the first flight of the day, and then subsequent flights you just do a prop check, make sure you got oil in the dome, and the thing will feather for you.
And that's pretty much how people do it as a matter of course. And that may be normalization of deviance if you want to get really technical about it, but I think it's an adequate way of doing
And we don't think in the case of 909 that happened because of the timeline?
Well, we know it didn't happen because of the timeline. He didn't spend enough time, because it'll probably take at least 3 to 5 minutes to do a full check.
And what's the basic premise of a power check?
The power check is to see whether or not you're producing takeoff power at barometric pressure. So the engine, and if you're not, then it'll be very evident. You won't be able to get the right manifold pressure check.
So given a certain RPM at a certain airport elevation, certain barometric pressure for the day, you bring the power up until the manifold pressure matches your field.
In some engines you do that. And this 1820, especially with the turbos, it's actually 35 inches is what you're looking for.
You bring it up a little beyond.
Yeah, beyond that.
And then what are you looking for? You're making sure that it makes that manifold pressure at that RPM. And if you've got a problem with the engine, you will not make that manifold pressure at that RPM. And what's it telling you about the engine?
Well, depends on what the engine's doing. So when you're doing this, the other guy's watching the engine. That's the part of the crew resource management, and it's outlined in the pilot training manual. And what you're looking for is it backfiring, is it jumping, is it vibrating, and stuff like that. And in this case, there's also a caveat in the pilot training manual that you don't run full power for more than 5 seconds on one mag, because it creates detonation, and the thing's going to blow up. So if they'd done the power check, he would have noticed that right away, and that would have been a no-go decision. But I don't think he had that in his mind. He's had problems with mags before, so I'm just going to avoid this, and we're just going to take off and go.
And so, because they didn't do that, there was a problem with the mags on number 3 engine, which was not really clear in the NTSB report. On number 3, they went into great detail on the mags on number 4 engine. So you're thinking that number 3 engine had that mag problem. Number 3 engine was in fact ended up running on one mag for long enough to create a lot of detonation. So it was really number 3 engine that was failing.
Yeah, that's correct.
Mac assumed number 4 engine, shut it down, and then put all that load on number 3 engine.
Yeah, well, number 3 was and I talked with the guy who did the analysis on the engine, and he believes that it was only on one mag from takeoff.
Oh.
So it was detonating the whole time.
Man.
And that's why, you know, a couple of packs reported, passengers reported backfiring. I think the crew chief did as well. And that's what was probably happening, was number 3 was doing that. But and according to the pilot training manual, so the Dash 1 doesn't say this, is if you have a problem like that, then you find out which engine it is by pulling the throttle back.
Right. You do the procedure.
Yeah, do the procedure.
You just don't reach up and...
You just don't reach up and punch the feather button, although the Dash 1 leads you to believe that's what you do. If you
do eventually, but you troubleshoot it a bit first.
You troubleshoot it. You have to identify and verify. He didn't do any of that. And if he had pulled the throttle back, it's very likely that number 3 would have continued to run at a reduced RPM, because now you're not in that detonation zone. So he never did that. It was up the whole time.
And just killed it.
And it blew it up. And so that failed by the time he's back around and the gear is down, and he's on the crosswind runway.
And NTSB was correct in doing the performance analysis and deciding it looks to them that they was only on 2 engines. He only had the performance of a 2-engine aircraft with the gear down.
With the gear down.
Bad place to be in.
Bad place.
Very low energy state. Wow. Wow. So the number 5 cylinder on number 3 engine was shown in the report to have been separated. Some people, well, what did the NTSB say about that particular cylinder damage?
Well, the NTSB is saying that that's due to impact damage.
Because it is on the bottom of the engine, and that engine is the number 3 engine that ended up in the de-icing tank.
Yeah, but those are so closely, the cylinders are so close together that you can't have just the damage centered unless it's a punch. You know, it's not the tank. It's, you know, it's like a big pole or something like that. Punch that one cylinder. Otherwise, you'd have damage all the way around, not only in the cowl but the adjacent cylinders.
So you're suggesting they got to look at the metallurgy, because these cylinders they're aluminum heads threaded onto steel barrels, right? And when they detonate, they separate.
Well, this one
this way.
That's right. That's what happened. Is it's separated at the barrel, so there's no damage. If you look at the picture, to the cylinder barrel, the head's off of it. How does the head come off of it from impact?
So that's another evidence of detonation and detonation failure of that engine.
That's right. And when you look at it,
number 3 engine.
It's a very thick casting, so it's blown apart like this, and it has ragged, jagged separation. You know, when you look at the metallurgy of it, it's been pulled apart or blown apart like this instead of smashed apart like that. There's no shearing. It's actually ripped apart.
90 degrees too. Yep. So in the end, though, so for human factors class, we've got expectation bias was part of the reason why Mac shut down number 4, and we've got normalization of deviant policies or procedures that led to what? That led to the expedited flight without doing a proper run-up?
Well, I'd say this actually, normalization of deviance actually runs very deeply in this situation, because Mac was the B-17 guy, so he's flying with a guy that has 22 hours. He trained himself. He knows he doesn't know anything. You know, and I'm not saying he doesn't, because I've heard more about him later on, and he turns out to be a fairly accomplished pilot. And he's flown a lot of twins, and he had a lot of experience. But Mac didn't treat him that way. He treated him like, you know, he's one of those old-time airline captains who just shut up and put the gear up when I tell you.
But Mac never was airline pilot, or never had formal CRM training like all.
Unfortunately, no. So he didn't follow any of the procedures, and I don't know if Collins has that part of their thing, but he didn't do it. And he didn't consult, and he didn't identify or verify. He already knew it was a problem, and he reaches up and he kills the engine.
And in the end, we have one person in charge of everything with very little oversight of the whole operation, which is a common theme in a lot of these complicated, larger accidents. Wow. Thanks, Scott. That helps explain a lot of what's going on with the B-17-909. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's complex.
Yeah. And getting the qualified people to study these accidents is a hard thing to do these days, because this kind of technology, this kind of information is disappearing rapidly.
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah. Hopefully this doesn't kill the Heritage Flight program, because I think it's a wonderful thing to share with people.
Yes.
From so many aspects of it, and politically this might be, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Wow. Lately, we've been studying about the excess reliance on automation and aviation safety, particularly around the world. Scott, you got any comments off the cuff about that?
Comments about automation? Yeah, actually, I think that is a huge factor in several of the accidents that we've had. The Maxes, 737 Maxes, in addition to the 767 prime air accident, that's automation. A large part is automation issues. I come from a school where, I mean, remember that guy at American?
Yeah, Vander Hoof or Vander...
Somebody like that, yeah.
The Children of the Magenta.
Children of the Magenta line.
Yeah, he was there, right? When you and I got hired, he was still there doing that briefing.
He was awesome. It was like, man, this is amazing.
What I hear,
Yeah, and his whole thing is if something bad goes wrong, you click.
Auto
throttles,
click.
And the autopilot, and you hand fly the airplane. And I'll admit to you right now that when I was flying at American, they wanted you to be autopilot on at 500 feet and then turn it off at 500 feet.
This is around 2000 time frame.
Yeah, and I couldn't land it. If I wasn't flying it for a little longer, I couldn't just fly the autopilot down.
At the last minute, click it off and get enough of a feel for
the airplane. Yeah, that's how to do a hard landing. So I almost put the mast down on a 727.
I did on my IOE in Washington. They said, you know, that short runway with the water on either end, and the check airman said, I just want you to get it right there in the landing zone. And so I gave him my best C-130 assault landing procedures. I planted it right on the spot. Sure enough, we got a call, ding ding, you dropped the masks in the back, and the check airman said, don't worry about it, that's what I wanted. Holy smokes, that was hard.
Yeah, well, I think I got about that close to it, so on one landing I did. But so I had to fly it up to about 8 to 10,000 feet, and about that on the way down. Because if I didn't do that, I mean, you know, flying a transport, you flew 130s. I didn't fly. I flew small airplanes. You know, even an F-15.
F-4s and F-15s.
It's a small airplane comparatively. You know, when you're flying a 7.6 300. You know,
it's different. Boy, that transition to the 141 for me was just the hardest transition I had. The first time in a big airplane like that. Whew.
Yeah, and it was hard for me actually to do that in the airlines, because the inertia and the time it takes and everything, you gotta be into it. And so I had to hand fly it, because otherwise I couldn't land it. So anyway, automation. I think that's the issue on the Maxes. We can go into a lot of detail on the second Max accident. So what I'll do is I'll just skip ahead to the 7.6. I think that was an automation issue too, but it's compounded by a pilot who's he's punching buttons. You know, he's like George Jetson. I'm getting punchy from punching all these buttons. And he punches a button, but it wasn't the right one. And hit the auto throttles in that airplane. He hit the go-around, and it's going to go, if the auto throttle's engaged, it's going to go right to go-around, you know, which is nearly full power takeoff. And with the pitch, slow speed, that airplane's going to pitch up because of the thrust vectoring effect. And he wasn't prepared to deal with that. And if he'd gone click to the auto throttles and disconnected it,
put him right back where they should have been.
It would have been okay, but it was he froze. It was a deer in the headlights.
And what's it doing now? And then he suffered that somatographic illusion of the pitch up in the weather, and he assumed again, expectation bias, if you will, stall when it was not in fact stalling. Shoved that nose over into an unrecoverable situation.
Well, that even goes back to that Air France 447.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more to that one. That's
really interesting.
But that's oh man, that's Airbus technology. All kinds of things.
It's made for, you know, for the lowest common denominator. We get people in the air and flying, and the airplane will handle itself. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't.
When everything goes to pot, you got to be able to still fly the airplane, and that's what we're seeing around the world today. When it comes down to it, we got problems.
We got problems, yes. Like you did a really good video on, was it Pakistan? The guy that did the touch and go with no gear?
Yeah, scrape and go, yeah. Boy, yeah, we still haven't got to the bottom of that one. Good, thanks, Scott. All right.